Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 4th Annual Musicians Conference. My name is Debbie Spence, and I'm the Business Development Consultant at the City of Hamilton in Creative Industries. We're really pleased to host this conference, and it's great that we can all get together, at least virtually this year, and discuss a whole bunch of topics. This year's conference theme is releasing your album. And today we're talking about getting ready to record, which is why behind me is a local recording studio, Grand Avenue. But before we kind of start the panel today, we wanted to acknowledge that as hosts of this conference, the City of Hamilton is situated on the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase in 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the First Credit Nation. Today, the City of Hamilton is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we recognize that we must do more to learn about the rich history of this land so we can do better to understand our roles as residents, neighbors, partners, and as caretakers. It is with these intentions in mind, we gather as members of the Hamilton music industry to share our knowledge and experiences. Our focus is in supporting the development and the retention of Hamilton musicians and in growing our local music industry. Musicians, you guys are recognized as core creators. Without you, there is no music industry. And the industry cannot grow and it cannot thrive. We thank you very much for your work and your creativity, and we want to help to continue to see you succeed as entrepreneurs and as musicians, which is why we organize this annual professional development event. The conference is possible through the work of volunteers on the Hamilton Music Advisory Team and the Musicians Subcommittee, with the support from the City of Hamilton staff. Today is the third of 5 discussions happening as part of the conference, and it is my absolute pleasure to introduce the moderator for today's topic, Samson Dekamo. Samson is a music producer and a youth engagement expert. He has developed and implemented a youth-led music program for at-risk teenagers with the aim of connecting hundreds of youth to career opportunities in local art industries in Hamilton and across the GTA. Samson's latest project is as the director of NTRL, Hamilton Space to access resources and assistance from artists. Samson is also a member of our musician subcommittee. I'll now hand it over to Samson as he is our moderator for the discussion. Thank you and enjoy today's event.
Okay, hi. Thank you again, Debbie, for the introduction. Today's discussion is about recording music, the starts of it, the ends of it. I believe that we're gearing this more towards amateurs, so we're trying to lead the conversation to that. We'll try to give the most professional input from these great professionals that we do have on board. We'll start the introductions now with the panelists that we do have. I first of all like to thank them all for coming through. It's a little bit difficult this year with the COVID restrictions, but I think that we have a great show to put together. I guess for now, we'll start with Roman. Roman Marcone is from Halo Studios. If Roman could unmute the mic and give his little intro, that'd be great. Perfect.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. I'm Roman Marconi. I'm a record producer in Hamilton. I have Halo Studio downtown on Augusta Street. And first off, I want to start and say thanks to the City of Hamilton and HMAT for this awesome few days of getting people interested or aware of how to deal with some music stuff. It's a great thing, you know. Thank you. I'm not sure what else to say at the moment other than, you know, I've been around. I used to run Catherine North back in the day. I ran Porcelain Records for quite some time with Steve Bigas, and you know, worked a lot out of a handful of different places from here to the UK.
Perfect.
Thanks.
No problem. It's a pleasure to have you here as well. I'm not usually good at the intro part, so I will lead to Nimal next, and I'll let them do their introduction as well, as I'm a little bit less familiar with Nimal. Nimal, please take the mic.
Hey everyone. Yeah, my name is Nimal, and yeah, I guess the reason I'm here is I play music. I've done lots of recording in various settings, both as a session musician on other people's projects, and then also with my own band. My main project is called Basement Revolver, and we actually just finished recording our second full length at Union Sound a month ago. So yeah, I can share about that. And then I also do recording and mixing, more of like a home studio setup. So yeah, that's me.
Perfect. And then we will go to Lily now from Coots Paradise Band. Lily could join us on the mic.
Hello there. So my name is Lily Saz, and I'm a keyboard player primarily. My band's name, like you said, is Coots Paradise. I've been a professional musician for a lot of years. I've also worked in studios with producers, so I kind of understand both sides of the glass. I was a member of, I still am a member of the Toronto Blues Society Women's Blues Review band. We play at Roy Thompson Hall or Massey Hall, depending on renovations every year, and do some touring. I've toured with Rita Shirelli, who's a well-known Canadian blues musician, and I'm a member of the advisory committee for the blues category for the Juno Awards, and a longtime member of the Musicians Advisory Council for the Toronto Blues Society as well. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And I'd also like to thank the City of Hamilton. I've attended these before, and I attended the other two panels over the last couple of days, and I'm really impressed that you guys managed to pull it off in a virtual setting and very well. So thank you.
Absolutely. And then our fourth, and final panelist here is Vani from Three Mirage Studios. Vani, if you could introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet everyone so far. I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to be able to talk with everybody. My name is Vani. I'm singer, songwriter, producer, engineer, coming out of Three Mirage Studios, based in Hamilton. I built this studio with my father when I was much younger, and it's just flourished since then. And I've been grateful to work with a lot of the youth of Hamilton as well. So yeah, there wasn't a lot of knowledge around this kind of stuff when I was younger and I was first beginning to learn about this kind of stuff. So it's really great to have something like this out here for people who are just starting out.
Absolutely. So now that we got everyone's introductions done, I want to just jump straight in. The first question that we have written here is how to prepare for the recording studio. And I would like to start it with Nimal, if you could lead it with the experiences that you've had with your band, as well as your in-home setup. And how that works. What's the first things you might think of to prepare for your recording session?
Cool. Yeah, I was thinking about sort of the process that I like to go through with my band, and then also what I recommend to artists when they're recording with me. One of the biggest things that I tell people is to figure out like your song structure and everything like that, like know all of your arrangements. But a really important thing for bands is to know what tempos you want to record at. And if you can rehearse to a metronome or a click, like that makes a massive difference. You don't want to be doing that for the first time when you go into a studio if you're not used to it. So my band, the whole week before recording, we played the album over and over to a metronome. Yeah, so I think that's one of my, biggest tips.
Absolutely. Lily, if you could actually go to your perspective first, and then we'll move over to Marcone and then to Vani.
That was a great tip. Nimal, a really good idea. I mean, obviously being well rehearsed and having your material prepared, the pre-production phase of it all is really important to, I mean, you don't want to be trying to work things out and figuring out arrangements when you're already there at $1 a minute or wherever you're recording. And so that's important. I kind of like doing demos in advance as well. Sometimes I'll go to like a smaller studio and we'll record a version of tunes so that we can live with them for a while and see what we like and don't like, and then make changes so that when you go in for the actual sessions, you're very well prepared. So that's probably the best advice is just get all your rehearsing and your arrangements figured out and your tempos, and don't be figuring it out when you're in there. You just want to lay it down when you're in there.
Move over to Marcon.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, all of that's great advice. The metronome thing's a pretty important one. You know, be prepared for that, just for ease of use going forward. You know, editing, looping, idea movements and stuff like that. The metronome's the tool, and being able to play with it. You know, that's a big thing. Also, being able to be flexible. You know, get your ideas done, down, and ready. But understand, you know, when it's coming out of the speakers, it may not work as you hear it in your head or in your headphones or your jam spot or whatever. And understand, you know, maybe tweaking, adjusting, changing, dropping a piece, dropping a part, whatever the situation is, be flexible to understand, you know, it's for the song. And if it's coming out of the speakers wrong, you know, it might need to be, you know, looked at in some way. So flexibility helps.
Absolutely. And then Bonnie, we'll move to you.
I think one of the things that surprises a lot of people who have never been in a studio before or have never recorded themselves before is like something like red light syndrome, which is like kind of like as soon as like the record button is on, like you're like nervous or you don't really remember your lines and like you sound different, you're coming in off, and like it just everything feels weird, you know. I feel like people should try to you know, kind of practice that feeling, like even just like setting up your phone and looking at yourself playing guitar or singing into the phone. Now you can see yourself and you like you're your audience, you know, and you can know that, okay, like the record button's coming on. If you're used to that happening, like there's less likely of a chance of you like messing up like 10,000 times on the exact same line, you know what I mean? Like over and over and over again. So like red light syndrome is like a big thing that people are, they just think, okay, like, okay, I can sing, I can play guitar, I can play drums, you know, but as soon as you hear yourself on playback or through headphones, it's a totally different world, right? So I think a lot of people should like, even recording a demo or just record something on your phone, voice note, anything to like get yourself used to that, for sure.
Mm-hmm. So from here, we're gonna go a little bit more fluid. Gonna let everyone jump in kind of when you want to jump in. I guess for the sake of us, you can just put your little hand up before we unmute our mics. But one thing I want to go into before we get into some of the questions is ahead of time, because a good thing that we talked here on was the anxiety about the recording and the pre-production ahead of time. What are some experiences that you've had yourself personally when it came to recording, when it came to either the anxiety to get ready to record, preparing a song ahead of time, and how you ended up overcoming that personal experience? If I said that in a right way, if that makes sense.
I could speak on that a little bit. Yeah, and I guess it's always different depending on what setting you're coming in on. Like if I've written a song, then normally I'm a lot more confident. But if you're in a situation where you are playing on someone else's track, then I've definitely like had a lot more nerves in those settings. And that's also where the point where Roman had with being flexible is really important. And there's some ways that you can even practice playing different ideas over songs, because when you're working with other people, yeah, you have to be prepared to change up ideas or try out new things. So yeah, the biggest thing I do to kind of combat nerves is rehearse in as many different ways as I can, and come in with a few different ideas, and also with that mindset of expecting to potentially change stuff. And then if those questions come up, then they shouldn't throw you off as much.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Yeah,
I'll jump in on the nerves thing. When people come into the studio, for example, with whatever they're coming in with, and it's a little bit hard for them, or they're nervous, or getting that red light syndrome, I find, as somebody behind the desk, lightening the mood, making it a little bit fun, just joking around about who knows what, and just kind of getting your, no more thinking in the studio. As soon as you stop thinking, then you can start playing without that barrier,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a good thing, just change the mood. Even if you're in a band with somebody that's having a hard time doing his overdub or whatever, just throw out a joke and see what happens, and you'll find the next take will be a little easier.
I don't know if maybe the raise hand thing is not working. I had it on, but I wasn't sure. I just didn't want to interrupt anybody. I was just gonna get into just familiarizing yourself with just a little bit of the language. I think for some artists, it's just intimidating on their first session to go into a studio and hearing language that they're not used to, right? Or not being able to communicate what they want. You know what I mean? So I feel like if you just there's videos everywhere, there's YouTube, all kinds of things. If you can just look up things that you think would help you, learning about just a language, just even very simple things, very simple terms. I think just hearing a lot of the different words being thrown around that they don't understand can kind of be intimidating and make the situation a little more tense. So I feel like if you familiarize yourself with the language a little bit more, and kind of understand what you're doing before you go in, it'll make it so much smoother, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to add as well that a lot of the time, the studio that you work in and the people that work there go a long way to making you feel relaxed and welcome. I think the vibe that is set by a good engineer and producer makes all the difference, so that they can set you at ease, especially if you're new at it. It's really helpful to have people who get that you're new at it and are patient and help you to understand. But it does that's a really good point, to kind of be familiar with the process before you go in, understand what can be done, what can't be done, and know that when you're hearing things at first, it's not going to sound like the finished product. You need to have an understanding that there's no point commenting now or asking questions now. It's too soon. Just relax and let the professionals do their job.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think also something that I want to move to for the conversation, also for the rest of the panelists, this is going to be super fluid on my side. I've never really moderated before, so let's have some fun. But now that we have the COVID-19 restrictions, I know that's been a major setback when it comes to our industry. Now people are looking a lot more into at-home setups. For me personally, with the kids that we work with, we tend to try to get them set up at home so they can work at their little bubbles, mostly doing vocal recording, as their production's mostly digital stuff. What's the difference that you'd see in it when it comes to doing band setups? How do you guys feel about at-home setups? It just come and set up the demos. What's your guys' recommendations when it comes to doing things at home?
Yeah, at-home setups are awesome. They're great. It helps you get familiar with what's going to come out of the speakers, what you're doing, and how it translates between the band members, for example, and making those demos, or even just hearing your own voice, and what it sounds like outside of your own head. Super important. And then getting familiar with, gear or digital versions of gear. Then when you go to the studio, or if you go to the studio, you see it and you get it, what's going on, so it's a pretty cool tool to have. And good for making, demos or even albums. Like I've done it at home, I've done it in wherever, but it's a good thing to have, especially when you're starting off, getting yourself going.
For me, I don't do any recording at home other than with my iPhone, because if you write a song and you just record yourself doing it with your phone that's good enough for what I need. But my band is 6-piece, and the next thing we're going to do is just record a song. It's for a kid. We have this little fan in the UK. She sleeps with our CD under her pillow, and she drew a picture of the band, and it inspired my guitar player to write a song for her. So what we're going to do is we're just each going to individually go into a studio by ourselves to lay down our parts because of COVID. So it's not ideal, but and kind of off topic where it's not recording at home, but that's pretty much what we're stuck with. So I'm just mentioning that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I guess, yeah, the raise hand thing's not working. So yeah, to touch on that as well, yeah, that's a wonderful thing to do. Recording at home is an amazing thing to learn. Like, if you can get just some simple equipment, like just to even it's the best way to familiarize yourself, like hands-on. That's the best way. Like someone telling you and explaining to you, like it can only go so far, but when you're actually like hands-on doing it yourself, now when you're in the studio, you know exactly how you want that to translate, you know? So I feel like that's like a perfect thing to learn.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to add is also a lot of the equipment, like every year it's getting cheaper and better. And here's, it does take some time to get to know things, but you can do some really great recordings and get usable sounds at home. Obviously, different aspects of recording will be easier to do yourself than others. If you have a beat made and you're doing vocals to that, I don't see any reason why you can't entirely do those vocals yourself. If you're in a full band, the biggest hurdle is always drums. But one cool thing to think about, especially if you have like budget restrictions or even just with the regulations right now with COVID, is you can do a combination of different things. I have mixed some stuff recently where everyone recorded their own stuff at home and then sent it to me to mix. I also collaborated with a friend in Alberta to work on a song. He recorded guitar and vocals himself and then sent it to me. I added some bass and extra sounds, and yeah, there's just so many options. Also, I do feel sometimes like the bigger hurdle with putting out your own music would be the mixing phase. But if you want to record something yourself, then there's a lot of engineers who are happy to take some tracks and then get those professionally mixed.
Absolutely. So there was a question that was brought up in our panel. Before I bring it up, I also would like to say, when it comes to in-home setups, it is a bit intimidating if you've never done it. But don't be too intimidated by it. I still remember when I used to use the EQ and I just wanted the squiggly line to squiggle. I didn't know what it was for. It takes a bit of time to figure it out, but once you figure out the words and you understand like it just means something else, it's a little bit easier. YouTube's a really good tool for that. One of our guests had asked, how long should you stick with the home demo phase? How long should you stick with a song, constantly reworking it at home, constantly tweaking things before you bring it to the studio? When is it becoming a point of it being like demoitis? And then when is it the point that it's like, okay, this is ready, we could take this over onto the next phase? Yeah, go ahead, Bonnie. I'm gonna start pointing you guys out now.
Okay. I honestly, I can't even see where you're pointing.
Yeah.
I think that really just depends. So you just have to really pay attention to what you're doing and try to realize when you're just putting too much. So if you're going to be the one that's mixing and doing all that for your stuff, like I would say, yeah, like take your time, work on your demo, because then it's going to, translate for like whoever else is working on the project with you. They can see your vision. Like people can't see what's inside our heads, but when you have it translated into the real world, like they can actually be like, all right, like I get what you're trying to do here. But like you don't have to take the demo so far to where it's like basically like a finished product. Like it's just a demo, you know what I mean? Like, but at the same time, you don't want your demo to just be like some random thing that has like a bunch of unfinished pieces and like be like, oh yeah, we're gonna go go to the studio for the first time, like you're just honestly gonna end up sitting there wasting your time, wasting the engineer's time, like, you know what I mean? It's just gonna cost you so much more money. So as long as you have the track, I would say at least to like a finished point where like the ideas, the general ideas are there, and like, you know, everything around that is there. I don't see why you can't just take it to the studio from that. But anything beyond that, or like way before that, like I wouldn't even take it to the studio yet. I would continue to work on it.
Mhm. Let's move to Roman.
Yeah, hi. So on that topic, you know, if you have a song that's ready enough, or you think it is, or you've got a couple versions where you're like, I don't know where it should go, that's where a good record producer will come in and help you out. They'll become like the sixth or seventh or fifth or whatever band member, essentially, and kind of hone your idea. You know, put the picture in perspective for you, and kind of have the outside opinion, because you guys have been jamming the song for 6 months. You've lost perspective. You know, everybody loves a version, everybody loves their something, and you know, and you bring it to a good record producer or somebody that can have that insight, and they'll say, this is great, this has to go, put this all together like this, and you're going to get something really cool. You know, and it'll come out the other end maybe how you saw it, maybe how you didn't see it, and be really neat, or you know, or you grab the wrong guy, and then it's a little bit strange, but still it'll be, you know, that's a good time for an outside set of ears, you know, when it's in question and close to done.
Absolutely. And we'll move to Lily, please. Thank you.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is that you do want to have your arrangements sort of close to done. The way we made our last two records worked really well for us, where we recorded our bed tracks at Grant Avenue Studio. And basically, we knew that the only things that we really couldn't change after is the drum track for the most part. I mean, you want to make sure that drum track and hopefully everything, I mean, if you nail everything else on your beds, that's great. But you don't want to be messing with that drum track. You want to have that solid, and if you're lucky, you're going to get a bunch of other stuff too, and then you can work on overdubs later, and those things can change. I know we really don't change much, other than sometimes we'll decide, oh, maybe this solo instrument is, maybe it should be guitar or not piano there, or maybe it should be flute, not violin. Things like that already fit in the puzzle pieces. But you really want to have your overview, your outline all ready to go and decided when you go in there. But don't overthink it. Like Roman said, don't. If you lose perspective, that's no good either. But you just want to go in there confident that you've got your arrangement, because that's the one thing that's kind of hard to change after the fact. It can be done, but you don't want to. You don't want to be messing around. You just want to have it down.
I can add a little bit. Just and you can kind of decide what vibe you want it to be when you go into the studio, as far as how much you want to add. If you're expecting it just be someone to work with as an engineer and they're strictly recording your music, or if you want to collaborate more creatively and get them to produce. The process that my band does is, for the most part, we just have like the structure down, you know, in all of our parts, but we go into the studio expecting to add a lot of things, and then we end up doing that. Yeah, it's a 4-piece band, so when we're rehearsing the songs, you know, we're hearing 2 guitar parts, bass and drums, but then in the studio, we end up adding piano and synths and extra guitars, extra harmonies. So yeah, some of that decision making can come down to your creative style.
Absolutely, and I think it's really great that we touched on some other parts of it when it comes to understand the difference between a producer, a mixing engineer, a recording engineer. Sometimes these do happen to be the same people, but these are very different roles, and hopefully we'll be able to touch on these a little bit more during our time. But one thing I do want to talk about, as we know, when it comes to studio time, you book in the hours and it's just down again. Like Lily had said earlier, you're paying the dollar per minute. What's the best way, in your experiences, either as engineers or as your experience for recording yourselves as well, to respecting the engineer's time, ensuring that you get the most value out of the session that you put together? And we'll start this one off with Lily, if we could.
Yes, well, first of all, conversation, time and place. Don't talk to the engineer when they're working and listening. Don't talk about last night's Jays game. Don't have, I mean, there's a fine line between camaraderie and having a good time and socializing, but you've got to get the work done, and it involves focus and listening. So I'm not an encourager of conversation except when there's a break. In the control room, if you want to have a conversation, go to the coffee area or outside. That's just a huge time waster, and I found myself often tugging on the sleeves of people in studio saying, come away from the engineer, leave them alone. So that's just one of the biggest time wasters, is extraneous conversation. Make sure that you have all the extra things you need. If you're a guitar player, have an extra set of strings. You know, whatever your tools of the trade are, don't get caught without those important things. If you break a string or if the unexpected happens, make sure that you have everything you need. If you have a special herbal tea you like to drink, make sure you've got that ready and made, all those kinds of things, whatever you need to feel comfortable. But that's probably my biggest obvious tip, but you would not believe how many people don't get that. They go into the studio and everybody's like kibitzing around and wasting time, and it's not a good thing.
We'll move to Vonnie if you can.
Yeah, just a couple things. First thing is, I think a lot of people that are a little bit like, you know, like a lot of people, like a lot of artists, we're all very connected with our music. It means a lot to us, right? So I think there are some artists who like to, like, you know, kind of shadow the engineer a bit. But I would say, you know, like give the engineer some space, you know, kind of back up, just like let them do their thing for a bit and then come back to it. And maybe if you want to give some feedback when they're ready to hear it and stuff, like don't come in while they're trying to tune up everything and like, you know, try to have like an input and all that stuff on like small things that they're trying to adjust for you, because it's really not helpful in the moment. It's actually taking more time because they possibly already know that or are already going to do that, but you just need to give them some time to do their part. And then maybe in a second when they're finished, like you can come back and like, you know, maybe go take a breather for a sec or just, you know, chill, sit down for a bit, let them do their part, and then, you know, come back to it. And then it also gives you fresh ears too, because now you're listening to the track with fresh ears. Even though the engineer's been sitting there, you know, listening to the parts over and over again, now you're the new set of fresh ears. Now you're even more helpful to the situation, you know? So for sure, yeah.
Absolutely. And we'll move to Nimal next, if you could.
Yeah, I think one thing to add to some of those points that have just been said is at the beginning of your session, or even if you get a chance to have a phone call with your engineer ahead of time and just get a bit of a feel of what their workflow is and what they are expecting. Some people are, you know, really happy to answer some questions about what they're doing if they know you're interested in the production side. And some people need that space to work. I personally get, you know, a little claustrophobic if someone's like, you know, sitting at my shoulder, looking at the screen, seeing everything that I do. But then I know sometimes in the studio, I'm that person doing that. But I've had that conversation to ask if that's okay. So yeah, I think that's, you know, just open communication and figuring out what everybody's working style is really important.
And Roman, if you could as well.
Yeah, for sure. Like, actually, that's a great point about the engineer. You know, they're probably 5 steps ahead of what you're hearing in their head, right? and they just got to get there, you know, and there's a process. You got to do 1 before 2 before 3, and so if you're complaining about 5 and they're on 2, you know, so let them get there. And then if it's rolling and the tone's not right or something, then say, hey, you know, like, can we just make sure of that or something? Let's take 5 and then come back to it. Same thing. You know, everybody takes 5, even the engineer. Come back, you listen, maybe he'll go, yeah, you're right. Or hang on, let me fix that. I got an idea, whatever the situation is. The other thing is, like as a band or any artist really, like if the engineer's trying to get tones or set things up, listen, just listen. If he says, play the kick drum straight for whatever, just kick drum, that's it, until he says play the snare, or the vocal, just sing until he says, don't just like put a couple words out and the check 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 check, doesn't help, right? You know, do your thing and whatever he's asked, that way it's efficient, you know. And if you're the guitar player and the drummer's trying to get his tones, don't go practicing your solo with your amp on full. It's just going to confuse, you know, like there's a time and place, you know, and a process, right?
Mhm.
So.
Absolutely. The one thing that I'll add for any of the people who may be more amateur, especially when it comes to hip hop, like the difference with it is mostly vocal recording, but for all genres, it's preparation, preparation, preparation before you come in. If you have a beat, it's on YouTube. Do not search it up on YouTube on the engineer's computer. Do not download it there on the engineer's computer. Come with a USB. The time it takes to transfer that file over will save you the 10 minutes for him to do the mic testing. A great point that Marcone had made as well was the enunciation when you're doing the testing. Do it exactly how you're planning to perform it. It's going to let the engineer know exactly how the microphone is supposed to be. And that's going to cut you down 2 to 10 minutes alone. That way you can actually put in down when it comes to a 3-hour session, a 12-hour session, whatever, minutes are minutes. It all goes down to the minutes. It doesn't go down to the hours. It goes down to the minutes, giving your engineer more time to be able to play with the mixing at that time. All these things are things that'll add on. And a question that I will start with you, Roman. There's plenty of different studios that we could be going to. There's plenty of different spaces all around town, and they all do incredible work. Now, if you're looking at things when it comes to your budgeting, what's your style of music, these things, what are the things that you'd weigh out when it comes to picking your studio?
Oh, that's a good question. When picking a studio, I think the vibe is the most important piece in general to begin with. Does it feel right? Go see it, check it out, hang, you know, if you get the chance to do a studio tour or something, or listen to stuff that's been done there, you know, if you just want to hear things. But the vibe, you got to be comfortable there, you know. It's like cooking in a kitchen, you know. You might be comfortable in one kitchen, you know, a commercial kitchen rather than a house kitchen, whatever the scenario is. So you got to feel good to be able to do your work there, and make sure they've got the stuff that's going to achieve your goal. You know, whether it's if you're doing hip hop and doing hip hop vocals, do they have the bits and pieces to beat your microphone at home and get the right vocal tone? You know, do they have the right compressor and EQ and microphone to make the chain to get that, you know, whatever you're looking for? That's an important piece, making sure they have the stuff, and the vibe. And, you know, the engineer is a very important piece. Like, they need to know how to use their gear. So, you know, that's, you'll hear that in their work.
And I'll move to Nimal next, please.
Yeah, and I think a huge thing is listening to examples of what people have worked on. Yeah, so when I've looked into studios for where to record my band, that's what we've done. And then, you know, if it's a case of a studio that has a couple engineers, you can, you know, request who you want to work with based on, you know, who you think will do a good job with your music. I felt so fortunate with the people I've worked with. They have added so much to the music, and, you know, we've gotten mixes back, and sometimes you barely have any notes, and they've done a bunch of things that you wouldn't have asked them to, wouldn't have expected them to. So you can find out a lot of that based on listening. And then another more practical note is, you know, think about what's realistic. Like, if you're in Hamilton, there's so many amazing studios in every end of the city. You know, you don't have to go to Toronto to get a big studio. And sometimes, you know, paying more money for a better studio, if you can't afford the hours to do a good job, then that's not worth it, right? You have to figure out a space that you can afford to, you know, spend the right amount of time there.
And now I'll move to Lily.
Well, for me, I mean, as long as the studio meets my basic needs, allows for editing after the fact, has the space I need and the sound I need and great mics and equipment, for me, it's really more important to choose the people. I mean, a good producer and a good engineer can make you sound good on any piece of crap. Not that you want to record on a piece of crap, but I really believe that the talent, the people twiddling the knobs are really what's most important, and the vibe for sure, having the right atmosphere, even down to snacks and coffee and comfortable seating and great lighting. I can remember working with different artists who, you know, brought their own, you know, scented candles, and you know, they were really particular about the atmosphere. And I don't really go that far, but you just want to make sure that you're comfortable. But for me, it's really much more about the people operating the equipment in a nice space is bonus, you know. But the talent and the ears and the vibe and the compatibility with the professionals makes just all the difference for things to go smoothly.
And then for Vonnie?
Yeah, everybody touched on some really good points. Those are all really, really important. Like what Rowan was saying, the vibe, 100%, it means everything. Like if you and the person you're working with, like the engineer, the producer, the people you're working with, even like you and your band, if it's not just you and it's multiple people, if everyone can't get along in that environment, like it's going to shine through in the music, you know what I mean? And then again, it's not just about the studio and what equipment they have, because you'll hear like really good music come out of like a hotel room, you know what I mean? And then some really bad music come out of like a really big studio that's really well known. And then some people will choose their engineers or their studio based on like, you know, who's been there and who the engineers worked with. That does not matter. It's about how that engineer will work with you. Will they work for you? Is that going to be the right move for you? Not have they worked with this person and that person, you know? It has to feel right for you. You want everything to kind of come together for you. So I think that's really important.
Absolutely. Before we move to our next question, I just want to sprinkle in as well, because we were talking about preparation beforehand. There is a little bit of a, I guess we could call like a takedown setup that you could have as well afterwards. What I'd recommend for a lot of artists is if you could get a hard drive or a USB that you could ask the engineer for the stems as well. More than likely the engineer's recording a lot of other people. And if you're going to be bouncing between different spaces, you'll be able to keep those vocal tracks, those other tracks with you on one thing. I would recommend to just put the $80 down on getting a 1 terabyte hard drive. That way you could have it. If you could even get 2, I know some people who have 4, leave them in safety deposit boxes just to make sure it's safe. That's something that I would recommend. And the next question I would like to get to, which I'll start with Lily. In a lot of these sessions that we're working with, when it comes to bands, when it comes to the engineers, when it comes to all these other people, there's so many other moving parts. And now we have to start talking paperwork. We have split sheets. We have things like that when it comes to it ahead of time. What's some of the stuff that you like to have prepared before you get to the session? What's the things you need to have?
Well, I want to have the lyrics, and I usually have sort of a chart of some kind for the music. I want to make sure that if we're going to stop somewhere in the arrangement as we're recording, I can say, okay, let's pick it up at verse 2. And the producer can look at the lyric sheet where verse 2 starts, and the engineer will also know where to, you know, just to save time, just make sure you can, it's basically any kind of map. You don't have to be like a professional musician with notation or anything, but some way of communicating where you are in the song so that you can move around it easily. That's one thing. Obviously, the things we discussed before, you know, your tempo and your keys and all that kind of stuff. That's, I don't really, I mean, if you've got the arrangements rehearsed and you've got that basic paperwork just so that you have that for the studio. I mean, there's a million things you have to do after the fact. Like when we're doing overdubs, I take very careful notes of who did what day, what's next, what still has to be done on each song, if that's the way you're doing it. I mean, if you're doing it live off the floor, then it's done. But in cases where you've got your beds and then you just want to have all your notes so that you know that when you're doing the next steps, that you're always organized and you always have a plan and know what's next.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'll move it to Roman next, if you could, when it comes to that topic.
So, sorry, just elaborate. So like preparing, like, what was that thing about the split sheet?
So the split sheets, when it comes to topics, you're recording the song, you've written the song, you have another producer. For most of the people, when it comes to hip hop, you'll probably have the guy's name when it comes to getting it off as BeatStars.
Yeah.
But how would you organize getting that paperwork in ahead of time, getting it ready, if you're preparing it for something like SoCan during your session?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we deal with things basically the way, like for crediting and whatnot, we just kind of after the fact, you know, so-and-so worked on this, we did that, here's the thing, here's the information. If it's producing or creating when there's points involved, like percentages and whatnot, we make paperwork beforehand, you know, going in so everybody's aware of what's going on, so there's no surprise at the end, and so there's no you know, like, oh, too bad for you, and you know, kind of situation. So you know, when you're going into a situation that's going to be like an important outcome, you know, where there's money involved or something like that, you know, you prepare on the way in. If it's you know, during the process, you kind of just you make some information between the two of you, email thread, something simple. If it's just for credits engineered, you know, whoever mixed or whatever, you know, we send an email at the end and say, just when you're printing something or when you're putting something out or sharing something, just tag us and make sure people know who did stuff. So it's helpful for everybody. And then, you know, yeah.
Absolutely. And then I'll move to Nimal next.
Yeah, I guess some of that stuff ends up being genre specific, what like the common courtesy is of, you know, what crediting you give people, or when it comes to SoCan, who you give points to. I know in some cases, in more of like, you know, the rock band scene, producers might ask for points, but that's never something I've done. All of the, you know, SoCan stuff is split between the band and who's like written the songs, and we are the only writers. We're not, you know, collaborating with anyone else on writing. Yeah, and then I guess when it comes to like if you're hiring any session musicians, just being very clear about, you know, what the rates are. Are you charging per song? Is it hourly? And with engineers, like, do they want money up front? Some people you know, might ask for a deposit or half of the fee at the beginning of the session and then the rest upon completion. So just making sure you know all of that information.
And then Bonnie?
Yeah, to touch on what Nimal said, yeah, so like especially when you're having someone else come into your session, like maybe they're just like playing the piano for like one song or like one part in one song, like sometimes like that is like forgotten. And like because I say most people would probably only ask for like just money, like just like charge you a certain amount and be like, okay, blah blah blah. But then there's other people who are very like well versed in like this industry, so they kind of know how moves are made. So they have contracts, they have like, you know, I'm getting this amount of percentage if I do this and blah 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 blah. But you just have to have those discussions beforehand so that you're not there and you already created the song, you already have all this done, and in your head you're like, okay, I can't agree with this, like this just doesn't work, because now you have all that time wasted, all that studio time wasted, and you're not going to end up using the piece or whatever it may be, like, you know. And then even between like even with bands, like band members too, like say like certain songs on albums, like certain band members will have more credit for certain songs. I know some bands do that, and some bands it's just like same credit for all songs. So yeah, I think that's really important too.
Perfect. I think the thing to summarize from that is that it's communication, making sure that everything's clear. Figuring out how to ask these questions, if it's something that you haven't done before, might be a little bit tricky at the start, but once you start learning the terminology, it'll be a little easier. And now that we're on the topic of questions, a question from one of our panelists is, or not panelists, sorry, one of our viewers. When you're looking to go to a studio, what's some of the questions that you can ask them to get a better feel of things? We'll try to go with some basic ideas, basic things that'll get you a feel of them if you don't really know what you're looking for when it comes to it. With this question, I'll start with Bonnie, if possible.
Alrighty, so a good thing to know is kind of what genres are they like used to recording? What genres are they most like well versed in? Like, because that will tell you like how much they're able to put into your project or your song. Like, they can add ideas along the way. Like, you don't have to solely depend on yourself, right? And you're more likely to get a better result that you're happy with if you know that they are more comfortable in that area of music and they're not just recording it just to get it out there for you, you know? So if you're able to find an engineer who kind of understands, like, you know, maybe what you're trying to portray, like what you're trying to do with your music, I think that makes everything just so much easier.
Absolutely. Roman, what might be some questions that you might ask?
Yeah, so good questions are budgeting questions, you know, and like properly asked budgeting questions about like just even starting off with, you know, what's your hourly rate, or do you do by song or whatever? You know, a really bad question is, how much is it to do a song? Because, you know, when I'm feeling spicy, I'll answer, well, how long is a piece of string? Same answer, right? So, you know, asking questions in that sense, you know, what's your hourly, whatever, or do you have any junior engineer, you know, we want to use the room. Do you have any junior engineers, or is there any way you can do what we want within our budget, you know, and say, this is our budget, we're looking to do this. Is it possible? You know, once you've, you know, opened a discussion in some form, because maybe it is, you know, you won't know until you ask. So the important thing is to ask, because at the end of the day, I have a few junior engineers that would love to do cool projects, and they can do it when I'm asleep because I don't like to be up late. And, you know, that's great. We can give you a discount and do it, you know, like, for example, right? Mm-hmm. So there's always ways to make your project happen if you have the right question, or at least the right, you know, way to approach it, you know? So, yeah.
Perfect. And I'll move to Nimal, if possible.
Yeah, and one thing to think of, at least when it comes to the like more band setup, is the method that you want to record. The two typical ways would be live off the floor versus multi-tracking. And some studios either might not be set up to do live off the floor well, or just don't have the preference to do it. So if you have that idea of which you want to do, asking that directly. And then another important thing, which sometimes might get overlooked, is just like, what's your availability look like in your schedule? A studio might be able to get you in to record next week, but then their mixing schedule is very backed up. And, you know, if you've got an idea of when you want your release to happen, yeah, the studio's timeline can, you know, play a part in that.
Absolutely. And Lily?
Yeah, I can't really add much more than that. I mean, you want to make sure that if you are recording a full band, that there's going to be separation of the instruments, so that you do have the option of keeping the tracks that you record that day and not having to redo them because of bleed. You know, that's always nice. We usually want to redo the vocals anyway, and just keep the rough scratch vocal as a ghost vocal. I'm always wanting to make sure that there's editing possibility afterwards, because I have worked in studios before where you know, there wasn't really a lot you could do if you had a major, you know, move this verse to that part of the song, and they just didn't have the capacity to do it. And I didn't realize that before I went in. So I agree with, you want to listen to examples of the music that they've put out. But again, to me, it's more about the people. So like Roman said, you know, if you've got a smaller budget and there's an option to work with a junior engineer, and just having, if you have a certain amount of money and a certain amount of time, and also to kind of find out how cool are they if you run overtime, or how flexible are they. Sometimes people will say, hey, this is our price for a day, and a day can be anything up to 12 hours or whatever is reasonable. But if you're done early, it's the same price. I mean, it really is like snowflakes. It's different everywhere, but if you know what you need and what you want, then finding the right people in the right studio is possible. And of course, if you have a good producer, they often have a studio in mind anyway, that might expose you to a place you hadn't even thought of. So that's another thing.
Absolutely. We have time for one more question. We'll go back to the closing thought. I think Roman had something to close out with there.
Oh yeah, I just had something to chime in real quick. I ended up doing a lot of hip hop recently, and one important thing when booking your session doing hip hop, and you want to do a YouTube beat, or you're going to take a beat, whatever, ask them if they could take a peek at it first on their speakers. You know, if they've got a minute, and just say, hey, is this file good enough? Because sometimes, you know, it sounds great in your little computer speakers or your car or whatever, but it's just annihilated there's no level. It's just, you know, it's too loud and you can't fit a vocal in there. And then he's got to do a lot of work to your file, you know, and then at that point you can reach out to the guy that made the beat and find a better version or something. That's an important piece, making sure your file you're bringing in is good.
Absolutely. So the last question that we'll close out with, and we'll go to our closing thoughts from our panelists. And it was asked from another one of our viewers, is it common to hire a producer as work for hire? I want to start this question with Lily, just because at that last point you did mention, if you have a producer, they do happen to know studios as well. Is it common for us as artists to look for producers for hire?
Well, certainly if you can afford one. If you don't have a lot of experience, a producer is pretty invaluable because they can keep everything on track. The other really great thing about having a producer is that they can objectively offer advice without it coming from inside the band. So, you know, if something's just not working, rather than having any kind of tension between band members, it's really good to have someone on the outside saying, no, this isn't working, whatever, we've got to take it there. That can be incredibly important. I'm a believer in using a producer. I haven't always been able to afford it. Sometimes I've worked at a studio where the engineer was really good and we didn't really need a producer. We sort of self-produced and it was okay. Sometimes that depends on the personalities and the dynamics. I was lucky enough to work with an incredible producer the last 2 records. And I should do a shout out to Roman here, who picked up the ball when our producer, Nick Blagona, died before finishing our project. Was almost finished, but he passed the torch to Roman, and that was a great choice because he finished it for us, final mixes and mastering, and did a great job. So that was a beautiful thing. But yeah, I think producers can perform a lot of roles, adding their own touches without overbearing on your music. So if you can afford a good producer and you know what their work is and it fits with your stuff and they believe in you and they're not just doing it for the dough, then I'm a fan.
Absolutely. And if anyone else would have anything to chime in on that topic. Nimal?
Yeah, I'll speak more from, I guess just the perspective of what it's like to work without a producer, since that's what I've done. That's a good question to ask, you know, whatever studio you're going to as well, is are the engineers, like, do they consider themselves producers as well? Nowadays, I find a lot of people do kind of play many roles, you know, like before it being a recording engineer, mixing engineer, and a producer were very separate things. And now a lot of people will do all three. So yeah, and if you find an engineer who connects with your music, like most of them are musicians. So I think they can add, you know, the same type of input as a producer can, as far as just being an outside opinion of the band. Also, an interesting point that's come up when I've had this conversation with some friends is sometimes when you give someone the like role of a specific producer, they really want to put, you know, their stamp on it and their name is going on it as a producer. So they may take a bit more, you know, of a opinionated approach as far as what they offer. And if you're down for that, then that's great. But I know some people have ended up working with producers and found it very stressful, and it ended up not really being something that they felt was their project anymore. So.
Yep, absolutely, Bonnie.
Yeah, I would say if you think that you are kind of struggling in that area, then sure, why not just try it out and see if a producer does help you? Because some people may like lose a little bit of guidance when it comes to certain things and kind of get lost in just like the creative process, that they're not really seeing the full picture. So it is good to have like that other opinion there. But yeah, like the mall said, like there are a lot of engineers out here who do consider themselves producers as well. So it is good to have that conversation and kind of find out, like, will they be able to do that, like provide that as like kind of like a service for you as well? Like, are you going to be pretty much doing that all on your own? Are they just going to be kind of just recording you? And because there are engineers that are like more in depth and like will kind of try to guide you and stuff, do like kind of what a producer would do. And then there are the engineers who kind of just like, you know, kind of just let you find your way, and like maybe you can hire a producer through them actually. So just good to always just ask those questions, because you never know, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna chime in from the producer angle. Like y'all have great points about, you know, the thumbprint and putting too much of yourself on there. That's a bad thing depending on the project and whatnot. Like totally make sure you got the right guy, the guy that has the temperament to work with your stuff and that's going to have the right vision. But as a producer, I think an important is getting somebody that's invested, so that they're going to make sure like their name is going on it just as much as yours, in a sense, you know. Where if you look at the liner notes, the band, you know, on the label, the producer is on that record too, and he's going to make sure, he or she is going to make sure they're not going to embarrass themselves, you know. So they're going to want to make sure that the project or product or whatever it is ends up pretty awesome, hopefully. Anyways, I mean, you know, there's always that one, but at the end of the day, they're going to want to make sure that they're, you know, giving your music the life it deserves, and that their name is going to go to good, hopefully, you know.
Absolutely, absolutely. And unfortunately, that is all our time for today. So what I would like to do before we wrap up and say our thank yous to all the people who set this up, I would love to say, if any of our panelists, if you have 3 things that you could throw out, quick jots, 3 things that you'd like everyone to remember, they can jot down in their notes. We'll start with Vani and we'll move over. I'll just point them out. Vani, what's 3 things you'd like for any amateur starting now to keep from this conversation?
Honestly, just keep trying to find people who work well for you. I know it's hard sometimes to just kind of, you know, feel out people and like going through the whole process, but it's so important. Like if you don't have people like who are working with you, who you vibe with, who are like as passionate about music as you are, passionate about your music as well, like that's really important. You want those people around, because it just always creates just absolute magic. And when you find those people, which I promise you will, if you keep looking for them and you keep, filtering out, because I know it's really hard to keep on the path. It can be discouraging sometimes, because there are some people out here who are just in it for, the money, or just not really as passionate about music. But I promise you, if you find a good set of people to work with in all areas and all aspects, it's gonna feel good, and you're gonna have a really good outcome. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Nimal, if you'd like to give us your closing point.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point of just making sure you really trust everybody that you work with, but also just have the confidence in yourself. If you're going to record your music, like, it should be music that you're excited about, that you think is great. And there's many reasons to record your music as well. Yeah, you don't always have to be doing it, with the idea of getting a record deal, or, it's pretty easy to put your music on Spotify and all streaming platforms or Bandcamp. So yeah, I'm recording music is just like a really fun creative process. So yeah, I just encourage people to dive into it in whatever way they can.
Absolutely. And Lily, if I can get your closing points as well.
Yeah. Well, one of the things too is when you're listening to the tracks, when they're still new, try to have an out-of-body experience and don't just listen to your part. People have a tendency to listen to your own part and picking it apart, and don't like this and I don't like that. Nobody likes their own picture, nobody likes the sound of their own voice, and nobody likes the part they played on the record. That's one thing a producer is good for. They can hear everybody equally instead of just their own part. Pay attention to detail, but don't overthink it, and have fun and enjoy the process, because recording really can be one of the best parts of being a musician. Live performance and studio are both really great parts of the process. So try and enjoy yourself and don't worry too much.
Absolutely. And then Roman for our final closing points.
Sure. Yeah. Practice. That's my three main points, I think. And no thinking. As soon as you're thinking, there's a buffer in between what you're trying to do and what you're doing. Practice, don't think, just make it happen. And then once you get to that point, it's going to be fun.
Absolutely. I would love to start with thanking the City of Hamilton Music Office for setting this up for all of us. Thank you to Debbie Spence. Thank you to Sarah MK for working endlessly this entire year on this. Thank you to all my panelists that are here. Nimal, Vani, Lily, Roman, all of you are incredible people at your work. My closing points that I'll leave out, as our perspective here at Neutral is a little bit different. We do most of our stuff through facilitation and branching people to other parts of the community. When it comes to all these videos, because they will all be accessible on Facebook afterwards, you can rewatch all of these. The most important part of most of these panels, to be honest, even though we had a lot of great information to say, is the beginning. It's the introduction if you're trying to get around to working with people. The three things that I always like to tell the kids to memorize is who, what, why. And it'd be that, who is it that you're listening to speak? What is it that they do? And why would you reach out to them? There's so many different people that are coming from these panels. There's so many different points of view. It's connecting you to so many different things. Think of these things. Everyone's accessible through social media now. Like Instagram is like annoyingly on my phone screen. So it's never a thing to DM me or any one of us. And just reach out, ask the questions. Just as Roman said, don't overthink, just do it. It's usually a lot easier than you think to take that step forward than it is to constantly plan how to take that step forward. Thank you again to everyone. I guess that will be our closing thoughts. I don't know if anyone from the city is supposed to jump on, but I had an amazing time. I will definitely be reaching out to everyone here just to keep in touch. And I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you.
Right. Thanks.
Thanks, Samson.
Thank you.
You did a great job.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you to you.